When I was writing comprehensive coaching taxonomy, I was also looking for entryways into the human consciousness and the psyche. Each of these domains takes us to the next level of depth in the human consciousness. First, we looked into how we make sense and how we interpret what we sense. This episode, we're going to look into underlying structures of what we sense and how the human operating model responds to that. In this domain are the narrative, cognitive, neurologic, and foundational blueprint, inquiry and reflections. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Coaching with Mastery and Elegance with Tijen Genco and my beloved companion, Sajili Mohan Chawla.
Hello.
Welcome, Sajili. And we are going to talk about the second domain of perceptual and structural inquiries and reflections today. How would you like to get us started, Sajili?
Well, thank you, and I'm very happy to be here again. So, I think for those who were with us in the first and in the earlier podcast, or if you're joining now, just want to remind everyone that this is the seminal book we're speaking about. And I think what's quite incredible about the book, or what makes it stand distinctly apart, is just really its expansiveness. It provides such a significant understanding of the complexity and layers of a human being and the maturing of a coach to partner with the client at each of those levels. Levels in this case would be the 5 domains. To remind everyone that we're covering one domain for each of these sessions. We covered the first domain, the felt sense, inquiry and reflection last time. We are doing perceptual and structural inquiry and reflection this time, and we will do, let me just quickly name the other. The third domain is field, systematic and symbolic, visioning in future architecture, and finally, integration and embodiment. Within each, there are incredible number of subparts. Having said that, I think let's just start. How would you familiarize us and orient us with the domain which you are calling perceptual and structural?
As you mentioned the last episode, we talked about felt sense. When I was writing this book, Comprehensive Coaching Taxonomy, I was also looking for entryways into the human consciousness and the psyche. So in a way, each of these domains takes us to the next level of depth in the human consciousness. The first, we looked into how we make sense and how do we interpret what we sense. And here in this episode, we're going to look into underlying structures of what we sense and how the human operating model responds to that. And what is in this domain are the narrative, inquiry and reflections, cognitive inquiry and reflections, neurologic inquiry and reflections, and what I call it foundational blueprint, inquiry and reflections. What is all that? Narrative is the most of the standardized and, as I call it, superficial level of coach education focuses. What is the client saying? What do we do about it? But in my teachings, we don't take the narrative as in verbatim. We're looking into how the client is forming their narrative. What is influencing in the underlying operating model and their functionality that is supporting the narrative formation, right? If we think about the human system like this smart device, we have an operating model. That's our culture, upbringing, our learnings and all that. That's going to help us and influence us in the way we narrate. And so the way they look at, I'm inviting the coaches through my book to look and listen. Not the story, but how the story is being told. How many times the story is being told? Is the story being told the same way or something is changing? And what is influencing in the story? The client's perceptual reality. And the cognitive responses, which is my part of the first part of the neurologic approach to coach training, I'm inviting the coaches to listen. How is the cognition working? What's being sensed is one thing. I can hear a sound from outside, but how do I interpret that sound? What are my interpretive mechanisms? What beliefs do I have about the sound? As a result, I'm going to emote, right? Which was the first episode. What are the beliefs? What are the values? What are the cognitive formations, the cognitive distortions do I have that are all going to influence my processing and therefore my narrating and therefore my lived experience? And then the neurologic part of this, which is the second 4 week of training, my neurologic approach to coach training, as a result of my sensory experience, what's happening to my nervous system? And how is that my nervous system response enabling me or disabling me into what I want? We're going to share an example of snippets from a coaching session today. And we're going to hear that the client had a belief. Belief was that the people won't change. And then as a result, her neurology was responding to that. There was an inspiration to do something, and therefore that inspiration was mobilizing her heart into motivation in doing something. Yet the cognitive response was people won't change. That's a belief. And that response was dysregulating the system into the halt. So then the one foot in the gas, one foot in the brake, and then the system cannot function. So that's the human neurology. And the coach needs to understand that. And with the foundational blueprint is all that lives. This is the operating system, foundational blueprint. What is happening is that the formative belief is people won't change. And therefore, I cannot enable myself to do A. I cannot enable myself to do B until I uncover that belief system in the foundation and co-facilitate the change with the client if that's their free will to produce another belief. We don't need to delete that belief, but we actually bypass it to create something else. And that then alters the whole functionality. The system errors are disabled. Now the system can function. And this is why I say my system, my transcendental coaching is sustainable in comparison to the other coaching modalities, transactional and transformational, because when you alter and upgrade and resolve the system errors, then the system is going to stabilize itself and no external accountabilities are required because system is going to function. That's how I explain. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't even know where to start, but give me a moment. I had made a couple of notes from your book, And of course, you were in the free flow. So I'm going to sort of combine the two to see that I am able to put it together. I do hear that this domain, which is the perceptual and the structural, building on the felt sense, has four parts. The narrative, which you of course very wonderfully said, how is the client forming the narrative? We are not playing at the shallow level of what is the story, but how is the client forming that story? And if I can quote from your book, how does the story shape the client's choices, identity, and a certain differentiation, therefore, between, look, this is the story and this is the pattern. So there's incredible depth right there. We then come to the second subpart of this domain, which is the cognitive, where, of course, you said it's the interpretation mechanism. And I really like how you said it in the book. The client can see how they think. I'm sure our listeners will be able to recognize that very clearly. The third part is the neurologic, which is an automatic protection reflex. It's giving us cues about what is getting activated, what is the nervous system bracing for, or guarding, or opening. Is it ready for change? Is it settling? I think that why I wanted to say that was because when I read it for the first time, I was language, something which was just floating around a little unformed. And as a coach and the client, when we are partnering, there could be so much happening with the client. And for us to be sensitive at all those levels of bracing, activating, guarding, opening, settling, ready for change or not, it's a wonderful playing field. And of course, finally, the foundational. I do hear you say that transcendental is sustainable. You therefore don't need an external accountability, which also then, in a way, answers the next question which I had, which was about, so what becomes possible when this domain is really tapped into by the coach?
What becomes possible is the free will. This is how I teach my neurologic concepts, because the free will, in my view, is not free until it's freed. Free will is being hijacked by our reactive and learned autonomic responses. Our nervous system makes the choice based on our foundational blueprint until we look at what are our belief systems, what are our values, what are our learned reactive responses, safety responses. We don't have the pause that we use in the meditation between the stimuli and response to find the freedom to cast our choice. What mainly becomes possible is the conscious choice making, and therefore self-sovereignty becomes available to humans. And this is where another piece is going to make sense, why I call my tagline achieving the highest potential, because then the human can reach to their potential through the choices that they make. Otherwise, their potential is going to be limited by the reactivity and precognitive patterns that forms the foundational blueprint.
I think this is so profound what you said in terms of the free will is freed from the hijack of our autonomic responses for self-sovereignty, for the potential which all of us are always seeking to tap into, to reach to. This is, yeah, I think free will is freed is just.
Yes, and most of the coaching now you can understand generates extra thrust to do something within the faulty mechanism that actually is exhaustive versus taking what's blocked the potential is much more flowing in harmony with the human nature, why they came to this earth with and how they partner with the universe.
Mm. And just the way you say that, Tijen, I get reminded of something which you and anybody who has heard either been a part of your mentor coaching or otherwise, the noble intent.
Correct.
I'm not sure we're showing that clip, but here we have the client in the midst and throes of everything which is happening, and her belief tugging in one direction and her heart in the other, and sort of partnering with her at so many levels. And somewhere I remember there was a line where you spoke about, so there is internal care and reverence. I remember stepping back saying, where did that come from? Because it's that noble intent, which is such a direct line from heart to heart. When we touch a human being at that level, in the depth of the safety allows for that potential. It's quite wonderful, really. You
Yes,
know,
and that level of depth of safety you're talking about is also part of the coach's regulation of the field between the client and the coach. And that also supports the neurologic responses, inquiries, and reflection because the neurologic system feels safe enough for the client to change.
sure. Beautiful, really beautiful. Right. So now, in this context, I think the whole tone and energy and feel of the moment has changed. But I will still ask, so, with this context of all that we've said, what is the coach actually listening for, listening into, and listening with? Really, what is the coach eliciting?
Coaches listening with their entire system to sense, first of all, what is happening. Yet, for this domain, it is more cognitive processing faculties for the coach because we're not listening to the narrative details, we're listening the architecture of the narrative. We're listening for what is it in this system, in the narrative. In this example, we're going to hear the client was aware already what the belief was limiting them, but when they are not aware, we're also listening to uncover what is the belief, what is the cognitive distortion. So we're really listening like an engineer to understand systemic faults and reactivity and responses and how the inner programming is functioning in the foundational blueprint level. I'm really listening like a robotics engineer when I'm listening to look at the systems, look at the systems execution functions. As I gave the example earlier, the heartless feels the inspiration to do something in the client, which we're going to talk about. And then the belief system says, people won't change, people won't change. Automatically, nervous system blocks the execution of whatever it is they're going to do. So I'm listening for the inner hydraulics, inner mechanics, inner architecture, what's being fired, what's being muffled, what's being executed, what's not being executed. So I'm looking at the systemic flows behind the scenes, workflows almost. Yeah.
Actually, while they are more words from the engineering space, I think for many of us, it'll create a very clear visual of what it is really that we are listening with and listening for. We've spoken so much about this particular client and a certain amount about this particular domain. Do you think this is a good time to now move to maybe playing a clip so we can really get a feel of what does inquiry and what does reflection sound like in this domain? We've spoken
Sure.
about.
A brief clip about that. So there is this internal care and reverence. You phrased it somewhere along the way as an excuse. And then the head came into the place. Noted very early on when we started talking, you mentioned this belief. You were holding your nose.
What's that?
Yes.
I know I talk my hands a lot, but I don't remember that.
Yeah. I wonder where this finger and touching needs to go for you to have a different processing.
I mean, it kind of going to my chest. That's where it wants to go. My throat a little bit too.
Okay.
Some more here.
And when you hold the hand over there, what happens to the inner dialogue with the, I need to care for myself, it's hot, it's not an excuse to do stuff. How is that for an example of a reflection and an inquiry?
First thing which strikes me is that typically we, as coaches, we do notice some movement, some expression of the body, but it's in the phrasing of your question, wherein you said, look, this is what you did. Where does this need to go for a different processing?
Correct.
I think that is where the difference lies. If you say, oh, this is what you did, one, the client is not even aware, and two, you've moved the client back into a very mechanical, cognitive space rather than really coming from within to see. Because she also, and it was beautiful to watch how she herself is feeling her way through her own body and her own responses, and then said, yeah, okay, I come here. So I think it does clearly reflect how your question as a coach helped her, the client inquire into her own space.
Yes, as you said it earlier, I'm talking about inner reverence and so on to stabilize the nervous system first. That's what I saw anyway. As you brought forward the noble intent, that's what the inner system wanted to do, as is my observation, and I'm validating that. And then what I see often, most primitive ways of somatic coaching. Coach says, even if they're going to engage, oh, I saw you put your hand on the nose. What does that mean for you? What happened in that inquiry? They took the somatic response, neurologic response, and asking them the cognitive information. That requires significant amount of translation in the client. It's a very hard thing to do. What does that mean? And so then they have to do it alone, a lot of processing, and often whatever they come up with is not going to be truthful, not because client wants to lie, because they force themselves to produce a response for the coach. But what I'm asking is, where does the hand need to go for you to process differently? Then they can have, okay, let me put in here, we'll put it there, whatever it is. Then I can sense, because I know how I feel here. How do I feel when I do this? How do I feel when I do that? You see, it's a very different inquiry that doesn't force the client to do excessive work and translate into something else.
Yes, yes. I think if you'll allow me to just add to that, what I also sensed was that the minute you said this, and she was almost surprised because she wasn't aware of it, right? However, the languaging of the question ensured that from that depth of space where she had reached at this point in the coaching, she wasn't just yanked out literally and put into a space of force feeding a meaning or trying to arrive at something. Rather, the languaging of the question, even though she was caught by surprise at this movement, just transitioned almost instantly and beautifully into, oh, really, where else would I want to go? And I think that little journey which happened right there was quite special.
Thanks.
So taking this further and maybe a little deeper, so what tonality would then signal to you, Tijen, that the level of readiness, how deep are we going? Is it staying within where the client wants to go? What is the depth?
Here, I've chosen to facilitate the change asked by the client through the cognitive neurologic domain, because otherwise, if I asked her fully intellectual processing, directly access into the change through the cognition, we wouldn't be able to process the underlying distorted belief, which she already was aware. If she was able to change it cognitively, she would have changed it herself.
Sure.
So therefore, I've understood that there is a hypervigilance in the system, that we need to facilitate the change through a different gateway, which was the neurologic and foundational blueprint. And I could actually support her to access to that gateway through her own system, through the felt sense, through the somatic settling in, than the processing intellectually, if that makes sense.
Yes, and I like the keyword gateway. It's, to put it really simply, the visual I get is you knock at a door and there are blocks in the door. So then you explore other avenues of access, which will be more meaningful.
And more appropriate, right?
Yes.
As I say, if you have a problem with your roof, the roof is leaking, you don't want your repair persons to spend time in your garage door. You go to where it needs to be resolved.
Sure, 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 sure. You think it's a good time to listen to maybe another clip, which then brings forward, as a master, you were then gauging the different gateways. And I think also maybe then where is the overwhelm? What are the resources the client is able to tap into?
Absolutely. So let's do that. Thank you for all of us. So when you talked about the new conduits, about the house, you talked about your repair persons going through the back to establish that. Where do we need to go through that is availability and maybe not so much resistance, so that
Yeah, I
and
think it's
safety.
the back, because
Yeah.
this is where everything is kind of,
Okay, overcharged.
yeah.
Okay, so where exactly in the back? In the back of the head, neck,
Yeah, right at the base of the skull.
amygdala?
Sure.
Don't agree with me. That's what
Whatever
makes
that
sense.
is, right there.
That makes sense. That's the reactivity point, right? So now we were trying this before, it didn't work. How about if you place one hand there, one hand in where the wiring needs to go? What happens then?
It feels lighter. Okay, now I feel myself swaying this way.
Forward,
Before I was doing this.
sideways.
Yeah.
So often moving forward requires forward.
This is really more obvious.
There was a crab walk, right?
Well, yeah, I just wrote a blog post or a podcast about crabs swimming sideways. How that was okay. It's okay to move sideways. I don't want to move sideways. Ignore my podcast, everyone. But that really took me off guard because it was like a pitching almost, just like really felt that way.
When the forward movements enabled in your body, what happens to your connection, powerful connection, and needing to hold on to this thought about people won't change?
It's kind of not there. Like it's not there. I mean, it's still there, but I'm not feeling it here when I feel it. Maybe it kind of bypass.
Just like your electricians, right? Mm-hmm. That's one way to do it. And when you connect and lean forward, what happens to the luminosity?
The luminosity. I don't know, it feels like I'm stepping into a meadow of sunlight.
Sunlight.
That was the first image.
Beautiful. When you step into the sunlight and feel your presence under the sunlight and look back into your version that was before calling the electricians to replace the wiring in the house, what would that notice? Okay. So now we could see the completely neurologic inquiries and then supporting the client into the meaning making. And when we connect different parts of the body, which was disconnected because of the belief system, that's the underlying mechanism, foundational blueprint execution, then the client feels the freedom to produce different inner life experiences that will eventually enable the outer life experiences.
Yes. So I think just to give a little more background to our listeners, you had suggested just in the course of the conversation, just a little earlier, about how it sounded like a house under repair. And she had come back, the client had come back to say, actually, I live in a 120-year-old house. And I was like, look at that resonance there.
Yes.
For the coach to have just said something that it sounds to me like this. And she said, yeah, but I actually live in a house like that. And she was getting some wiring repairs, and the repairmen were coming from the back of the house. Now, why I gave this background is because, see, even in your question, the languaging was, so where for this process would you like to approach it so that there is not so much resistance? I like the way you put it out there. Do you want to say anything about that, Tijen? I haven't heard many people do that.
Correct, because her initial narrative included that I want to do a lot of things and I can't do it because I have this belief. Yes, maybe that belief was resulting it, but she formed another belief. Because of this belief, I'm disabled to do something. There are hijacking one thing after another. So then I'm asking her, this feels like giving you freedom in the possibility of this freedom. What happens to your relationship to that belief and disbelief, which is a different thing? How do we delete that belief? How do we get rid of that belief that would have hijacked the system and put her into much safety mode. But I'm asking this seems like making things okay. When you feel the okayness, how do you want to relate to that belief without making that belief wrong or something harmful? You see, that's what I was doing there.
Yes. To me, it was also a really masterful languaging, and to the point which you made earlier, which is about the free will being freed from the hijack.
Yes.
Client is not even aware of how the nervous system is being impacted and is just flowing into the space of, so where do I access lesser resistance? There's so much of somatic exploration, which is most gently guided.
Yes, and the thing is that technicality, people often think that you have to sound so technical. You don't. You'll see, we're laughing and all that. But what is the underlying technicality? She is also certified health and wellness coach. That's why I languaged amygdala. Otherwise, I wouldn't even mention it.
Yes.
What does the amygdala do, right? That's the main reactivity system that creates alert. And where was her hand? Naturally, body knows, body is wisdom. Why not partner with the wisdom of the body? What was disconnected? She's holding one hand in the amygdala, in another one in her heart, the chest. What is this? This is an organic acupuncture. We're connecting to two disconnected systems now. Amygdala feels what heart feels because they are now connecting. That's the technicality. Obviously, the coach needs to understand these mechanics, but still, partnering with the client's body's wisdom, one can get there even not understanding what the heart does and what the amygdala does.
Sure, sure, sure. Yeah, yeah. And again, as she spoke about, when I do this, there's forward movement, there's not sideways, all that. There was a palpable openness in her. You didn't say, what happens to your belief then? You said, what happens to that thought? And I thought that was, again, so skillful. Because when the client is, and this is how I saw it, we earlier spoke about what is the cue, which is activating, bracing, guarding, ready for change, right? So really to sense that, the client, the grip of the belief has, so what is happening to that idea then? And not said what is happening to that belief. I'm apprehensive. Most of us as coaches might use that to loop back, but we might just close the client again. But here the client was opening. So building on that, sensing that readiness for change and languaging. And in an earlier place, you'd also said, so what about the idea that? So both places, I was like, how cleverly, even in the moment, you are using different set of words, which will, based on what the client is ready for.
Yes, thank you for bringing that forward. It's intentionality. There are times we absolutely need to use the client's language, and there are times I'm doing that to distance the client, inviting them to the meta view to look at. And that's part of my signature inquiry, which I teach as part of my neurologic approach to coaching, Genco method, reconstructive inquiry, which means that we're reconstructing the foundational blueprint via the inquiry. And it has one of the aspects of that is to distancing between the attachment, loosening the attachment to the thought form and the client's identity. So they
Yes.
no longer seize the belief within the identity, but something on top of the identity.
Wonderful. I am quite tempted to, therefore, somehow in my mind come some of the common errors, although you use the word in your book, unhelpful examples. And each one, if you will allow me to read a few and maybe you can elaborate on them, because just to build on this, of really being in sync with the client. And that's the other beautiful thing which your various programs sensitize us as a coach to, which is everything which is being offered by the client. How do you really not attend to everything instead of leaving it unattended? In service of just ticking the boxes of competencies, which of course we'll come to and they have their place. So, do you think this is a good time then to build on that? Some of the
Yes, absolutely.
misconceptions.
Please go ahead. Yeah.
So, again, I'm reading from the book, and there are unhelpful examples for each domain. So, I will start with the narrative. In the narrative inquiry, the coach is saying, I love how beautifully you've articulated these two concepts, appreciate your understanding of what triggers the anxiety in the chaos. When you talk about the flow, what are the things about that aspect of yourself that really make you proud?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's such a predictable question. And I was like, okay, so what is the conceptual misuse here? And I was just blown away because here you're saying you are directing the client, you are steering them toward a preferred emotional outcome, you're responding from the coach's model of the world, you're imposing a reframe. I was breathless by this time. I was like, so much packed into that so-called appropriate question. Anything you want to say?
Well, I want to explain to the audience that those examples, unhelpful examples, came out of years of being an assessor, coach assessor for all three levels around the world. And then that's why I've written my book, to teach not only to coaches, but to the mentors and evaluators to understand what the coach's response do mechanically to the client. And here, just even one word, proud, that almost directs the client to the emotion pride. We need to be indifferent as a coach. The main curiosity about the narrative would say, when you state your story like that, what is the emotion do you get to experience? I don't have any preference. I'm inviting them to feel and figure out. Here, the coach's response looks very skillful, but it's actually very directive.
Yeah, yeah. I'm going to read one more example. I think I will pick up the example you've given for foundational blueprint inquiry, where the coach is saying, I can see that cooking is a big part of your cultural heritage and is getting in the way of your weight loss. Yeah. How can you abandon this part of your culture to stay true to your goals? Even as I read this, I became the client, and it was that either or black and white, which the coach was throwing at me, really made me feel very helpless and confused. I just became the client in that moment. And I was like, oops, what do I say now? What do I have to make a choice here? And I was like, I'm so not ready to let go.
Yes. And with that one question, what is coach doing? This is what I intended to teach to the mentors and assessors again, besides the coaches. Coach is unintentionally telling the client, as you said it, either or, these your so beloved cultural food values cannot exist with what you want. That's what the coach is saying. You have to choose one of those things. That's very limiting and not freeing the free will, and confining the client into a structure that belongs to the coach, because coach's model of the world doesn't process the possibilities.
I like the way you say, and I mean, you've given many conceptual misuses, but the last one says collapsing cultural identity into a problem to solve.
Yes.
Uh, it was so disturbing. And I was like, yeah. So, yeah, I think I'm just going to pause this here. Maybe should I read? This was from the inquiry space. Can I also read one from the reflection space?
Sure, why not? Yes, let's give them another example.
Yeah. So over here, let's pick up the neurologic reflection because we picked up the other there. So the coach is saying, you say it's a life you don't belong to. As you say that, your shoulders drop even more. And it seems like you don't like the thesis you've chosen for your PhD. I actually read it twice. I said, what is the misuse? And then when I read the number of misuses, it was like you're imposing causality, overriding, invalidating the client's actual experience, and over-interpreting micro movements, assigning meaning, and really force feeding.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, you say it converts and collapses a neutral neurological response into a psychological interpretation.
Yes.
And I just thought,
sometimes it is helpful for coaches to present what they see, but we also need to be careful about, because it is harder to even assume what the nervous system is doing. In our example with Sandy today, our client, you could see the body start to sway forward and backward. And sometimes our system needs to move around to free the blocked energy. She said it's like a forward movement, and then I supported what might be possible. Versus I could say, okay, now you're moving forward with this, would have been a very determinative limiting response.
and I think I continue to be touched by this sensitivity of neutrality.
Mm-hmm.
And even the most well-meaning of coaches, somehow a certain directiveness just makes its way through a back door. So I'm just going to move now to, in the context of all that we've said, Tijen, I'd really like our listeners to hear what high resolution coaching therefore really is.
Yeah, so you could start to see, listening to us in these series, they're going to start to see the nuances that enhances the resolution for client to see. So it's not like black and white old tube TVs, 1 pixel here, 1 pixel there. Connecting the dots versus high resolution coaching that presents this high definition picture of what is being expressed, what is being not expressed. This level of nuanced definition that carries high volume of data in a meaningful way for them to respond and understand, so that in electronics, sampling matters in the digital realm, that if you sample every hour, you're going to miss a lot of things in between, right? The data presented is not going to be as clear. But when you sample a lot from what the client is presenting and create a beautiful, understandable picture, that's what the high resolution coaching gets to be.
Quite wonderful. And of course, it's like getting just the right, when we had to find the wavelength, when we had those mechanical radios.
Dials.
Yeah,
Yes.
the dial, right? Where it was just crystal clear. And what comes to mind is what you said right at the beginning, that with that happening, the client is seeing it so clearly. And you spoke about transcendental, therefore being sustainable.
Correct.
Right? Quite wonderful, really. So our listeners, I'm sure, are ACC, PCC, MCC. So what would you say? How can they build this fluency over time? I don't know whether you'd like to approach it from what we need to unlearn or any micro practices or any specific programs, although you've spoken about so many, but really, I'm sure many of us are hungry to to be even more deeply, to assimilate this even more deeply in us.
Yes, thank you. So this is why I kind of see my high resolution coaching post MCC because the mastery seems limited into certain levels of competent responses. What I'm teaching here is the responding to the client in a high resolution way, not necessarily competency boxing the client. So what needs to happen is that the self-awareness of the coach. Otherwise, as you read it in the misuse of the examples, the unhelpful examples are if the coach is unaware how their model of the world influencing and narrowing the client's choices, then they are gonna keep doing it. And one of the things, as I say, their self-work is important, but I also highly recommend understanding their cognitive distortions, which the first part of my neurologic coaching helps coaches to see how they live in it and how they respond so that they can also assist somebody else to see them. Getting familiar with that, even just searching what they are and how they subscribe to those, there are common use ones that will be helpful. Understanding how their culture shaped them would be helpful, how their beliefs are shaping their narratives, and listening to the narratives from a structural point of view, learning to listen. I often say that the coaching is relearning the language you speak because now you're exiting from the rephrasing words of the culture, but choosing each word intentionally. That's why my words are sounding and landing differently because I'm intentionally choosing each word with sensitivity into the moment, what it requires. So, those would be some practices to understand. And we talked about my somatic approach to coaching, energetic approach to coaching last episode. And this episode, in fact, is about to start end of July. We're recording this July 17, 2026, the first part of the cognitive distortions and beyond NLP, my neurologic approach to coaching is going to start. That offers that sensitivity. And additionally, I have mentor coaching mastery course coming up that I will be teaching how to listen to the exchange happening between coach and the client through the lenses of taxonomy to understand the helpfulness and unhelpfulness of the coach's response. So even as a coach, you're not interested in mentoring, you can benefit from that training to understand what happens in this exchange.
It's really quite a range of offering. And I've heard you use the expression, what is the thing beneath the thing with respect to the client? But here, what you're really saying is, what is the thing beneath the thing for you as a coach? Because it's going to come in the way, it's going to sort of color your lens, consciously or otherwise. So, yeah, well, I think that's really wonderful. What else would you like to say, if anything at all?
I would just say that hopefully these series are helpful for coaches to awaken into their methodologies or anybody listening to this and wanting to develop their communication skills to the next level, establish heart-to-heart, deeper, meaningful connections to anyone, that understanding the mechanics of the way we communicate across the languages in my view, is a delightful thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it is. I mean, if this is what we are committing to and wanting to do, then yes, I think there's a lot of richness which your work and your book and your courses offer. And thank you so much for this opportunity to really understand domain 2, perceptual and structural inquiry and reflection. Thank you so much, and I look forward to exploring the next domain with you in due course.
Yes, thank you for this discussion, and our listeners and viewers. We look forward to meeting you on the next domain.
Thank you.
Thank you.